The Polish GROM has been fighting a secret war for years. Our enemies aren't human. Part 2. Blahowitz here. It's been a bit since my last entry, but I've been busy. Considerably busy. Truth be told, the experience has been unexpectedly enlightening in ways I hadn't really considered. Having around a decade of experience in the maneuvering response element that is GROM, everyone usually has a certain skill base that they're assigned to, and then they branch off from there. I was a designated marksman, what you would call a sniper, but no one actually calls us that. One of the biggest things drilled into my mind by my leadership early on was attention to detail. More so than everyone else in an already critical environment. Observation, environmental details, body language, far-off structures and figures, any rapid change in previous patterns. From there, I was supplemented with breaching skills, advanced medical schooling for trauma care and immediate action in the field, and more. Many different companies will have a special mission set to them. Some mandate that everyone passes through advanced diving courses. Some require Halo training. Coming into Detachment Echo, however, was an eye-opener into how they do things. Once you are in the know about the Strigoi, having been inducted into this shunned and secretive subunit of my nation's most elite force, they ensure that you know everything. Their history and their migration patterns, from Romania into the northern Balkans to Croatia, Germany, and their ongoing invasion of Poland. The scale is staggering. There is no known number of cells or groups, only the nervous system that they use in terms of rail networks, tourist routes, a system synergized so deeply into the trafficking network that persists in Europe that Kroll believes not even the men among them know what is going on. And when they do, well, they aren't around for long. That is just one of the many arteries they overtake. Parasitic is an apt word. So, I've been spending a considerable amount of time getting caught up on my new weapons of war. Advanced chemical research, reloading shotgun shells with salt and buckshot dipped into holy water. Though, as Kroll himself says, they're a good additive, but ultimately they die the same way as anything else does. During my first few days at Echo, I got a peek at my first autopsy of one of those things. We were in a back room of our compound. The cadaver was carried in a black body bag by 2 members of Echo and dropped onto the table. One of our medics, gloved and masked up. A singular look over to me as he warned, "Don't inhale," with a chuckle before unzipping. I wish I hadn't. Even before I saw the thing, I smelt it. A level of rot that burnt the inside of my nostrils and made me feel like I was inhaling septic fumes. The pigmentation of the skin had fully mutated into a murky gray, bordering on colorless, much like a body after its blood had stopped pumping. The nutrients of the skin seemed to have either been absorbed or removed somehow, as it pulled tightly against its muscles, splitting open in some areas to reveal rotten tendons and meat. The fingers were a mix of sharp claws or skin that seemed to have been armored up with some black callus type of texture. Our medic showcased this as he roughly cut through one of the black fingertips with a scalpel. A black blood-like ooze dripped out, thick like molasses as it poured onto the table. Yet even as that thing remained dead, it still moved. He placed a wooden sample stick into the substance, and I watched as it reached out, attempting to crawl up until it lost its volume, and then was bagged up by him. I was at a loss for words as Major Kroll took a puff on his cigarette. Turning his head towards me, he said, "Remember when I said not to let any of it touch you?" He asked a rhetorical question as he gestured towards the ichor. "So, this is some sort of pathogen, an infection?" I asked. Kroll shook his head, pulling on a set of latex gloves, his cigarette dangling between his lips. "The properties of their blood are a symptom of their mutation, but they aren't bound by science. They're as old as Europe herself, but so are we." He then grabbed one side of the thing's head. I could hear the dead flesh squish underneath his fingers as it turned to look at me. The eyes were dark, red blood that had almost turned completely black, soaking them as the center remained an ill white. It seemed as if the iris, everything in the center that gave it personality, had been completely erased, revealing a singular dot, the color of milky white. Probably the source of the glow, if I had to guess. "They're no longer one of us, Blauschwitz," Kroll stated, locking eyes with me. I could see every painful day of the decades that he had been fighting them, demanding that I understand so that I could avoid being a casualty of this unknown war. There is no cure, no way back. The only thing that we can do is put them all down and ensure that it does not spread further. They're going to show you no quarter, so show them none. Understood, Sergeant? I nodded. What else was there to say? What else could I suggest? The circumstances were terrible, brutal, maddening. The next several months of indoctrination included seeing the lengths of this combat against our foes firsthand. Cattle depots designed as drop-off points by smugglers for the trafficking ring turned into slaughterhouses that saw people, humans, dissected, sorted, and processed. I'll not be elaborating on what that last term means. Interception missions to interdict abductions conducted by them are always short notice. They're in the dead of night or the beginning of dusk and are always down to the wire. But all of it under the backdrop of so many dead. I don't know how it hasn't gotten out, why it isn't seen, but that's the world that we live in today. So many people suffer, die. It's become mundane. Corruption and evil has been allowed to persist, so this ancient enemy has no problem adapting to circumstances in its favor. No matter how endless it seems, we can't let them win. We won't. A chilling revelation came a few weeks ago when recent raids had produced a single message. I would love to sit here and tell you that the Strigoi are mindless animals, that they're beasts, that they are consistently outsmarted and rely on numbers alone. That is frustratingly incorrect. Past encounters and evidence have shown this to be true. So, when we arrive at a place that they've already fled from, the majority of the time everything is taken with them or has been smashed. So, when we kicked in the door of an old underground grain storage area, the walls lined with nothing but rust and dried, well, I don't know what, and all that's left on a table in the center of the room being human teeth, hair, and a note. Well, we knew that it was intentional. In Old Romanian, it read,
"One day, your fury will fade. One day, the heat in your souls will relent. One day, when the cold takes you, we will be there to welcome you."
You didn't have to be one step ahead against an enemy you had surrounded. You just needed to know where to prod, where to slice, and where to retreat. They believed that they could outlast us. We were going to prove them wrong, even if we had to fight them down to the last Strigoi. One of our most recent operations was one that definitely displayed the gravity of our situation. Like I said previously, most of what the Strigoi do is unknown, because they systematically euthanize or assimilate all those who become aware. So those who do don't last too long. This made gathering information extremely hard, considering most of the time our intelligence was skewed. It's hard to fight a war when you don't know where, when, how, or why. That being said, our luck came when a town far towards the southeast border had reportedly captured a coyote who turned himself in. All of the senior leaders of Echo were huddled around a table, myself included, as Kroll laid out the details. Supposedly, he was hired to ensure refugees coming from Belarus made it through. From there, they would be taken to a bus depot and eventually sent en route to Spain. A few mundane shots of a breach in our mighty eastern perimeter, along with cross-referencing images of the coyote himself on CCTV in a city center. That is, until he led them to the bus depot. There, he gets his money and leaves. He goes back because he's realized that he was being shortchanged, Kroll says, reading out the report written by the local police themselves. He then said all of them had been led into the Bay Area, where they were being slaughtered. Men, women, children, all of them. His contacts that had previously been of the living suddenly bore jagged teeth and tore into the people that he had helped ferry hundreds of kilometers. He managed to outrun the Strigoi, one of the team leads asked. Barely. He kept running for hours on end until he gets into a small rural village. Unluckily for him, it's one that is well aware of our enemy's tactics and goals. They are refusing to hand him over to the national police because of the dangers of infiltrators, so we are going to collect him ourselves. One of the communication sergeants sits forward. The village is secure, still loyal to Polska. Major Kroll nodded. The police chief there is an old friend of Echo. He's already enacted curfews and perimeters within the town. Even if the enemy is closing in, that is one safe haven that we can count on. And so, with that, the plan was set. We'd be leaving for the village to collect the coyote as soon as possible. The terrain around the village was dense. You don't know forests until you've been to Poland. The trees sometimes grow no further than an arm's length apart. This meant that there was absolutely nowhere to land if we came in from the air. Thus, we had to travel by road. We weren't going unprepared. Everyone could feel it. The eyes of the Strigoi were all centered on that small hamlet, and the forests around it were how they were going to maneuver. Thus, Major Kroll ordered for us to move in a full convoy that included 6 Cougar MRAPs. Though we've been working on our home brew, the American Cougars worked extremely well in terms of armor density. A crow system mounted above allowed the gunner to use whatever weapon system that was mounted from safely inside. Each vehicle also seated 6. Though, having been in one in country, they can get extremely cramped, especially when packed to the brim with all of our gear. However, this was a mobility op. Infill as fast as our multi-ton convoy of death would allow, grab the target, exfil as quickly as possible. There was no room for error or time for slowdowns. I was in the lead vehicle accompanying Kroll himself. Until I got assigned my own team, he wanted me riding with him as part of his personal detail. While the major rode up front with his driver, I was seated in the back alongside a gunner who held his M249 close, along with a comms sergeant in charge of maintaining auxiliary radio traffic with the rest of the convoy. On top of all of this, we were to wear our biohazard equipment. The Americans call it MOB, though ours is a bit of a hybrid from conventional CBRN suits, with the boots, gloves, and hood. A protective Gore-Tex multicam outer shell, worn to protect us from any infection with the Stragoy's blood. It was combined with M50 protector masks or pro masks. It made things cumbersome. We had to control our breathing, which in our operation was easier said than done. However, it gave us the edge of protection against the very real parasitic properties of the Strigoi. I had been put in charge of the main gun, a Browning M2A1 50 caliber machine gun, mounted on a Crow's, a remote operating system that allows the gun to be controlled from within by a joystick and panel. Being the front vehicle, my job was to watch the front of the convoy. That several hours long drive through the winding forest roads was tense, my grip on the gun's controls not loosening as I scanned the road ahead. The ISR view displayed any heat amongst the cold winter forest. But that's the thing, we weren't looking for any heat signatures. My mind still thought back to those cold signatures, flashing, moving, hunting, able to close the distance in seconds. Several tons of armor and a machine gun that could cut through a building mounted on top, and yet I still felt a chill run down my spine as I realized they were probably out there, and they had been watching us since the start of our mission. "We're nearing the town. Look alive," Kroll says through the grainy speaker of his mask's voice amplifier, stirring everyone as the gunner quickly looked out the side windows. The comm sergeant immediately jumped on his channel. The convoy slowed to a halt as we reached the entrance to the village. Between the two walls of the dense forest around us, the dirt road was cut off by a police convoy. Lights flashing as simple barricades stood in front of us and our objective. I scanned each and every single one of those officers that stood before us. All of them came up normal, no cold signatures, yet they simply stood there. Kroll knocked a few times on the console, signaling for the back ramp of the MRAP to be dropped. "Blaukowitz, cover us," he said. The gunner followed the major out as he exited the MRAP, walking up the convoy. I couldn't hear what was said over the loud hum of the MRAP's engines and through the several dozen millimeters of armor, but I could tell that it was tense. The police did not relent in letting the colonel through, as the gunner stood beside him, watching for any movements. If these people were in the know about what was going on, who could blame them for letting paranoia absorb their mind? Attacks, abductions, and now a bunch of armed and masked soldiers roll up with enough firepower to level the whole town. That being said, we still have a job to do. When one of them took a step towards Major Kroll, I centered the gun's reticule on them, the sound of which seemed to scare them back as they realized what was aiming at them. Then, a leader among the police emerged. Walking up to the Major, they both shook hands, and I could easily make out that it was probably the police chief. As the Major quickly walked back to the MRAP, the door opened as I could hear the lawman bark at his men to move their barricades. Why the resistance? I thought that they were waiting for us, I asked Kroll as the MRAP sealed back up.
The locals around here are very superstitious. Muffled hysteria to the fullest extent. It's kept them alive. All things aside, we rolled in with the arsenal of God himself. They think that we're coming here to put a boot on their neck. Don't worry, they won't stop us. Just smile and nod.
Kroll reassured. I didn't like this. This felt more like a KLE in the Afghans rather than traveling through our home. This plague, the Strigoi, they were dividing us, destroying our society from the inside out. They didn't even need to do anything. Just sit and let us argue and destroy ourselves. We maneuvered through the village, which was a snapshot from an older time. Old-style stone and wooden houses built amongst paved roads. The roofs were a mixture of wood and old traditional tiles. All the while, we rode within our million-dollar chariots. The white noise of the heavy engines and our breathing through our mask the only sounds.
Set us up near the church, the T intersection just in front of it,
Kroll ordered. His driver complied but asked,
Towards the back, sir?
He nodded, stating,
They are less likely to attack holy ground.
Wouldn't that mean that they're also more likely to know where we're set up, sir? I asked.
Yes.
The Major said, pulling on his helmet and locking on his ear protection mounted to the side. Setting up along the front of the church, which was towards the eastern end of the village, the ramps dropped as we stepped out into the cold air. The layers of gear and Gore-Tex, the only thing protecting us from the coming frost of the night we were trying to outrace as we secured and cordoned off the T intersection. We set up our vehicles in a defensive posture as Echo took up security around the church. It creeps into my mind every day. The idea of us being attacked from every angle. No matter what we did, we were the best of the best. But these things didn't follow the conventional laws of the world. Our movements would always be telegraphed. So our tenacity had to be even greater than theirs. The priest came out to greet us as Major Kroll took the lead. The old man walking down the stone steps past the small wooden fence of the church as he shook his hand. The priest kissed the armored Oakley knuckles of Kroll's gloves as he spoke in a broken old voice. It was clear that age combined with stress had not treated the old man of God well. I thank you for arriving. I'm worried they are already surrounding us. The streets are infiltrated at night as our warriors did all they could to stave them off for your arrival. The priest says. My eyes followed his to what he was referring to. The local police, carrying around rifles and weapons per their chief's orders. Though, even as some joined us in setting up security, others eyed us, as did many townsfolk, one of whom was this woman. She was in the middle of the road, a blue and white dress, blonde hair. She seemed to have been looking at us, at me. When I looked at her, she walked off, down the walkway of one of the houses out of sight. My mind was drawn back to the present by the Major's orders.
You're going to be fine, sir.
Kroll said as he patted the man on the back. Shortly after this, our pelters boomed to life as he spoke on the leader's comms.
First and third squad, remain here and secure the area. Second squad, you're with me.
Kroll said. Turning to me, he gestured for me to follow.
You two Blaukowitz, let's go.
As we moved down the dirt road on the edge of town, away from our comrades, the buildings were to our right as the woods remained to our left. I didn't take my eyes off of it. The trees, the impermeable fortress of our enemy. They were in there, waiting, probably until the already setting sun fell below the horizon. The Strigoi had proven to be as intelligent as they were malicious, and their cruelty had no limit. Flashing lights could be seen as one of the police vehicles from the blockade out of town pulled up. The police chief hurried out to join the major as we headed for the police station. The station was a simple single-story gray and blue building, though weather and disrepair had rendered the blue almost completely gone. Built on a slight incline, we could see the yellow lights from within illuminating the evening darkness around us.
Has he talked yet?
Kroll asked. The chief nodded. Plenty. Though I told him to save it until after you arrived. He's spouted many details. I've had them all written down and secured. He seems to believe they've penetrated the town's perimeter at night.
So does the priest.
The leader of Second Squad quipped, to which the chief shook his head. No, my night watch reports back nothing. The Strigoi is attempting to off-put us by making us believe we are surrounded. I don't care what they've done to the cities. Our home has not fallen. Not yet.
God willing.
Kroll muttered. The chief led us into the station as the second squad leader, Echo 2, ordered a few of his men, which included his machine gunner, to stay in the lobby to help keep the entrance secured. Whilst some of the officers went about their duties, others stared at us. We were well armed, questionably supplied, multicam crusaders entering their town. Who could blame them for being a bit suspicious? But then again, we were their only hope.
If these guys keep eyeing me up like they are, they're catching one on our way out.
One of the GROM operators muttered as we headed to the detention level below. Major Kroll immediately snapped at him, ordering him to keep his mouth shut. The tension was rising. No one liked this. And the light was running out quicker than our patience. I could hear the outside squads communicating on comms whilst we maneuvered.
Echo 1 to 3. Have your Vic scan the twins' trees. Direction 106 degrees.
Echo 3, I copy. Nothing.
Echo 1 to Echo Lead. When does the curfew begin?
The chief quickly knocked on the basement doors, all of us standing in the cramped stairwell, quickly gaining claustrophobia as Kroll answered.
Lead to 1. 9 mics. Echo 1 to Lead, I copy. Be advised, we have an increasing amount of green for watching us still.
I looked to Kroll, who focused on his progress with the chief. Then, my eyes met Echo 2's through the lenses of our masks. We were getting cased by the Strigoi, the townsfolk, the world. Finally, the door to the cell area was unlocked. A single hallway full of a dozen cells in the cramped concrete basement area of the rural jail greeted us, as we had barely a two-person wide area to walk through. Has he been fed? The chief asked the guard on watch, to which he nodded. Yes, sir, he's ready. The guard said, we needed to get out of here. We needed to grab this SOB and leave before our enemy's claws tightened around us further. My anticipation grew as Kroll and the chief hurried forwards towards the cell at the end. Then, a pit in my stomach formed as the chief's eyes went wide as he shouted, What? Kroll's eyes lit up with rage as he leaned towards the bars. Being just behind him, I caught a glimpse of the coyote, or what was left of him, sitting back against the wall on his bed. The man had had his chest slashed into and nearly completely hollowed out, causing his body to slump forward only slightly. The gray walls, the white sheets, and the worn stone floor were all painted with blood, gore, flesh, and innards, as it was clear that he had been torn to pieces. The coyote had not just been murdered, he had been executed. My hand tightened on the pistol grip of my rifle as I stared at the sight. The others with us quickly looking around as Kroll's head snapped to the police chief.
What the F is this?
I don't know, the chief said. I turned back to the guard on watch, asking, was there a breach? He would never get his answer or fully finish his sentence as someone opened fire into the chief, impacting his head, chest, and neck as the traitor messily unloaded on him. My eyes quickly snapped to see the shooter, the officer who had let us in. His pistol was being held limply in his hand, all of his training gone. I looked closer and I could see blackened veins, his skin splitting at a cellular level, and a set of dark red eyes. It must have been mere nanoseconds. I had just turned away from him, and now here he was. It was. We had been betrayed. I was less than a foot away from the police chief when the 9mm round tore through the front of his head. My face was painted with a mess of his gray matter as we all snapped to react in that cramped hallway. The Echo 2 quickly tried to raise his rifle, but caught a round directly in his plate, dropping him and causing him to stumble back into me. Both of us nearly laid out as the hallway echoed with close-quarter gunfire. Major Kroll and several of the others, however, reacted, unloading a salvo of suppressed gunshots that snapped in the dead air. It took rounds to the chest, head, shoulders, pelvis, being rendered physically incapable of moving as it slumped to the ground. Silence overtook us. Then, gunfire erupted from the floor above, then from outside. Our comms lit up.
Echo 2 Sierra to lead. We are taking contact.
Echo 3 to 1. We've got multiple cold signatures at our 8, 6, and 3 o'clock.
This is Echo 1. Copy. Wait.
This place is compromised.
Second Squad's leader growled as I helped him up, checking his plate to ensure that the armor caught the round. It did. That didn't stop him from nearly hacking up his lungs from the impact. Kroll remained silent, staring down at his old friend. He shut the one eye that still remained intact. He then reached into the chief's pockets and recovered the notes from the interrogation. Yet, a long look of remorse blanketed his face. Fighting continued as we could hear it echoing through the concrete structure. Then we heard heavy automatic fire from far off. I knew that sound. The thunderous chain of booms of 50 cal as it fired off at a distant target. Our MRAPs were firing at something. Our comms lit up again after this.
Echo 1 to lead. We are taking contact. Multiple infiltrators within the town. We are actively taking fire from local law enforcement. We are fighting to maintain the perimeter, sir.
Sir, I asked. Major Kroll finally snapped back and stood up. shoving the book beneath his plate carrier as he chamber checked his M4.
Echo lead to Echo 1 and 3. We are maneuvering back to your position. Defend yourselves at all cost. I say again, if you are attacked, shoot the F back.
We quickly hurried towards the door, only to be met with the sound of gunfire as assailants hurried down the stairs. 9mm rounds cracked off as we quickly dove into open cells. We used the concrete walls for cover as the metal door became riddled with bullets. A local police officer quickly kicked open the door, hurrying in and firing off his pistol at us. Even as our rounds tore through his armor, pierced his torso, he still continued to stare at us with intense hatred. As his blinding white pupils surrounded by the blood-borne plague in his eyes gazed at us, he hissed with his jagged teeth.
F you.
The second squad leader yelled as he fired at the cop. Flicking his weapon to full auto, he fired, removing the officer's head with a burst of 5.56. Then, we finally saw one of them, slinking and maneuvering through the railings like a lightning-fast creature of gray flesh and rot. A Strigoi wearing tattered police clothes rushed us. The Echo 2 braced himself with his rifle, keeping the snapping jaws just centimeters away from his face. Luckily, his breacher came to his aid. The GROM operator firing off his shotgun at the knee and pelvis of the creature. The creature dropped to the ground. The officer then took the demonic entity's head off with a blast of 12-gauge buckshot. A few other GROM operators joined me as I pushed up, clearing the rest of the hallway in a rolling T, as Major Kroll was right behind us. Painfully, we fought our way up the stairs. A few of our guys taking unlucky grazes on the shoulders or sides from the turned cops. Yet it didn't stop us. They had the numbers. They had us trapped. But we had superior lethality and aggression, showcasing it every single step of the way as we cut through them like a scythe. Pushing forward to the main floor, we quickly rushed in to see, well, one heck of a sight. It seems that not all of the police had been turned. A single local law enforcer was trying to fight off one of the Strigoi as it grabbed him by the front plate, pushing him to the ground. I raised my MK-18, but I wasn't fast enough. It tore through his neck, slashing at his chest as a mixture of black and red blood coated the ground. I quickly fired off rounds, slamming the trigger of my rifle as I riddled the head of that thing, yet it didn't stop. No, it only stopped when 3 of us fired into it collectively. We topped off our magazines. More bodies lined the hallway heading towards the lobby. As we moved forward, Second Squad's machine gunner, who had been left up here to provide security, charged one of the Strigoi, slamming it directly into the wall, causing it to hiss and growl. The guy was an effing unit, a true monster. And it was hilarious seeing him wrestle as he smacked the demon with the full weight of his 249. He then fired into it. None of us needed to assist him as the back wall became coated with the infectious blood of the entity. As we poured into the lobby, the gunner quickly turned and fired off towards the front. The other GROM operators who had stayed behind with him quickly backpedaled and fired off rounds, riddling the desks, half walls, and columns, tearing apart the inside of the station, causing plaster, wood, and papers to fly, obscuring the air. The windows were completely shattered as the door to the front of the station barely hung on by a single hinge, before falling and shattering. The distant fire of our MRAPs suppressing the enemy could be heard shaking the foundations of this ancient hamlet. One of the Second Squad members topped off his SIG MCX, Turning to us, he asked,
Where's the chief? The prisoner?
Major Kroll shined his tack light on the front of the station, now dark as the damage from the fight had taken out every single light and lamp. He muttered,
They're dead.
The gunner, who was changing out one of his drums, quickly looked up in shock.
Huh? How'd that happen? Parasites killed the rat, then the chief.
Echo 2 said, kicking the head of one of the Strigoi as he checked on his men, positioning others to pull security. The gunner moaned. He slammed down the top cover of his belt feed as he stood up, asking,
I thought this department was supposed to be secure.
The chief was the only secure one.
Kroll stated. Just then, a piercing, wretched scream that sounded like metal being dragged on concrete came from just outside the station. Gunfire caused us to duck our heads as some of the officers, now nothing more than thralls, ran forward, grabbing pieces of broken glass or fragmented metal from the station. They attempted to charge us. Major Kroll muzzle-thumped one of them in the skull, causing them to shriek as they recoiled back before Kroll fired. The gunner quickly laid down suppressive fire, closing in on one window as Kroll looked to me and Second Squad's leader.
We are effing leaving. Clear the funnel.
We did. The only way to breach a death funnel such as this was to lay in with enough overwhelming firepower to cause the other side to buckle. I reached for a small pouch on my kit, pulling it out. 16 ounces. A small circular device with a pin and a spoon system. A Model 88 anti-personnel hand grenade. Normally, in domestic operations, GROM would only carry less lethal munitions. However, Detachment Echo had made it extremely clear that we were beyond the limits of conventional warfare, and these were the most extreme circumstances. I quickly armed the grenade, tossing it through the door and watching it sail past the entrance. Everyone ducked their heads. A colossal boom could be felt, shaking my ribs as fragmentation shot everywhere, tearing apart corners and edges of the entrances. Without hesitation, we assaulted through the gap.
Let's go!
Echo 2 shouted as he led his squad through the open threshold, pulling our NVGs down as we prepared to fight our way back in a low-light situation. Several combatants lay on the ground in front of the station, blackened fingers reaching out as they stared at us with hate. Our rifles snapped around, the mounted lasers appearing like lances as we moved from body to body, confirming kills as we moved. We had no time to rest as we immediately took fire from some of the houses. Rudimentary shotguns, police with rifles. Through the blue and white glow of our Nod's phosphor, I could see their glowing eyes as they stared at us. I quickly took cover behind one of the police cruisers, now torn apart by fragmentation and bullet fire. I fired back into one of them hiding on a porch. Several others also did as Kroll called out targets. Echo 2, the leader of Second Squad, was to my left as he took cover behind a van. He noticed her when I did. The woman from before. Her blue dress and blonde hair quickly appeared out of the darkness and walked towards him. Her face was calm. It had a peaceful composure as she walked towards him. Her stare met his, so he probably barely registered her reflective eyes. He barely had any time to react as she slashed at him, tearing into his throat as I watched him drop to the ground. His hands tried to plug the jugular wound as she lunged down onto him. I immediately spun towards them, firing off several rounds. The rounds impacted her skull, dropping the she-Strigoi before she had a chance to carve any further into him. With the area secured, Kroll rose to his feet as I quickly rushed to Echo 2. She had slashed just underneath his pro mask, right above his plate. Precision that only they could manage. Kroll muttered, then he grabbed a nearby GROM member, assigning him to
Carry him to the point. Laukowitz, you're in charge of the second squad. Keep these demons off of him.
It was like something within me reactivated. I snapped back to action. We quickly picked up and moved. One of our riflemen carrying the fallen Echo 2 on his shoulder. Major Kroll joined us as we assaulted back towards our convoy in an extended diamond. All around us, they tried to attack. From the trees, a pair of gray and black claws would reach out, only to be fought back with a burst of one's rifle. The deep, guttural roar of another Strigoi came from between a set of buildings, only for our gunner to mow them back behind a set of shrubs. It was only 5 blocks to our comrades, but it had to have been the longest 5 blocks in my career. Their plan to trap us had failed because ambushes depend on the target being rattled, and GROM doesn't get rattled. We reached the MRAP defensive position as one of the 50 cals snapped to a position in the darkness, red and white rounds being sent only to be answered by the splatter of one of our foes. I quickly set in my men at the position, and soon silence followed. We all stared into the darkness, our heavy breathing beneath the pro masks, the hum of the turrets scanning, the sounds of our truck engines, and the sounds of us sitting down in the gravel and dirt, the only sounds.
Get me an ace now.
Kroll barked to the squad leaders. He was calling for a basic assessment of ammunition, casualties, and equipment. This was necessary for getting a read on what the state of an element was after contact. Right now, we needed to know what was going on. In total, we had conserved our ammunition well. No losses in terms of equipment or weapons. And only a few of the GROM operators that had stayed back at the church took injuries. The majority were from the hail of gunfire they were getting hit with during the initial attack, before the fire superiority of the MRAPs was established. Once established, that quickly flipped the tables on the enemy. However, even as things might seem all right, Kroll marched over to the priest.
You.
I didn't know. The old man muttered, only for the major to stop just in front of him. One of the members of First Squad tried to strangle the priest, only to be held back by his squad leader. They avoided the church. The same reasons why you were able to hold here as well as you did. Apt tactics, Major. But I tried to warn them that they were infesting the village. To be honest, who could argue? Other than the chief, he had been the only one to really talk with us as we entered the village. We had believed that the others' silence and avoidance was paranoia of an armed convoy entering. Instead, we got what we had now. I looked around and I saw the dead. Dozens upon dozens of the small hamlet, all put down after being forcibly conscripted to serve the Strigoi. Now, all that was left was the dead. The rot of our adversaries mixing with the cool air of the forest around. However, our woes were not gone yet.
Major!
Our medic called out. I turned as the priest grabbed his mouth, shaking his head. No, 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 no. The holy man muttered as we looked to see him hovering over Echo 2. Our fallen comrade was barely clinging on. Black blood had bled through his trauma bandages, showing signs of infection as he began to twitch and spasm. I quickly rushed over to the man who had been carrying him. We breathed a sigh of relief when we saw that the blood had not gotten through his mop suit. That still left the matter of Echo 2. He was no longer choking on his own blood. I looked over and I could see that overtaking his eyes and the veins on his face, the formerly red mess that was his jugulars and throat was becoming a mess of rot and, well, I don't even know what. I just remained silent. I didn't know what to do.
Sir.
First Squad's leader asked Major Kroll, who walked over to Echo 2, taking a knee beside his fallen operator. Through his mask, I could see the Major's eyes. The look on his face was that of a man who had seen many of his own comrades go this way. All the while, the priest was muttering a prayer for Echo 2. Then, with whatever control he had left, he nodded, reaching out to Kroll, who grabbed his hand. Then the Major's other hand drew his gun. The shot rang out and reverberated into our souls long after we had packed up our dead, assisting the priest in salting and burning and finally burying what remained of the townsfolk before leaving. I remember when I was first promoted to the position of a lead in GROM. Having survived the baptism of uncertainty and harsh adjustment to special operations to be amongst their flag bearers, there was anxiety, yet excitement. Now, here I am a decade later, battlefield promoted to be the leader of Major Kroll's 2nd Squad. And all I can think is, when does all of this end? It can't just go on forever. We fight these wars so we may see a better tomorrow. Not just eternally fire into the darkness and lose those shoulder to shoulder with us. The ride back in the MRAP was silent. The body of Echo 2 lying at our feet as I watched over him, having taken his spot to carry on his role. The memorial service was held shortly after. The cause of death was listed as the result of a snap deployment overseas. We all stood there as our comrade was laid to rest. The silent, controlled fury I saw in Major Kroll's eyes told me that he wanted to tell the world the truth of what was happening. They wouldn't believe him or any of us. So for now, we have to continue. Though he does tell me that the losses weren't in vain, and the information we gathered from the village has been able to pinpoint a major junction that they are using as a base. So we're gearing up. We're going to go down into that little nest of theirs, and we're going to burn everything they've got to the ground. I don't know when my next check-in will be, but I will be back. Blaukowitz out.